As one of the first presentations today, I wanted to start with something suitably lofty because I'm very, very excited about online education, and I want to get you excited about it. I think online education has the chance to revolutionize not just education, but the whole history of the world, and I really believe that. And I'm going to try to summarize the history of the world through the perspective of the history of education. So there have been 5 big moments in history where education, the way we teach each other, has completely transformed. And really, you know, unlike most industries that improve in a very incremental fashion and have steady linear progress over time, education seems to be more of a stair step. So not much happens. There's minor innovations, but not transformational innovation. And then every so often, a transformational innovation happens, and everything changes, not just for education, but for the entire world. So the first one, which is in prehistory, is not this. The first one is just the invention of language. And that happened around 45,000 years ago. And it's what anthropologists call the Great Leap Forward, where suddenly it was the first killer app for teaching each other things. And suddenly tool use exploded, population exploded. And then the next big one was the invention of writing and numeracy. And that was about 10,000 years ago, and that allowed for much greater agricultural production, right? Especially numeracy. And the first civilizations resulted from that. The next big one was the text in the academy. The idea that you can take the great thoughts of the great thinkers of the day, like Aristotle or Al-Khwarizmi, who invented algebra, and you can codify them, and you have to hand scribe them over and over again, and you can spread those around the world. And that graph is meant to we had to sort of guesstimate this, but that graph is meant to reflect the percentage of the world's population at the time that got a basic education, so basic literacy, basic numeracy. So it's less than 5% at that time. And the next big leap forward was the printing press. And what looked like a great leap forward with the academy and the textbook, when you expand out the graph, it doesn't look like such a great leap forward anymore. The printing press in the 1400s took those texts that had been hand-scribed, and it allowed for mass production. So that began to see the advent of a merchant class and a middle class in Europe. And the next big leap forward was basically in the early Industrial Revolution. Education's always been about cost per student, whether we think about it that way or not. That's what it's always been about. The reason it's so inefficiently distributed is that the cost per student is very high. So each one of these innovations reduced the cost of student and increased access at the same time. In the early Industrial Revolution, we started treating schools like factories and kids like widgets. We started treating schools like an assembly line. That sounds like a bad thing, but it wasn't, because it reduced the cost per student to such a degree that the richer nations in the world could institute compulsory K-12 education. So free and compulsory primary and secondary education. That was the first time that had ever happened. And they took the lessons of how to optimize factory operations and used it to optimize teaching. And that made teaching less personal, but it made it much more widely available. And it's not an understatement, it's not an overstatement to say that everything, and I mean everything, about the modern world is a result of compulsory K-12 education. There isn't a single invention you can point to, there isn't a single life on this planet you can point to that isn't directly or indirectly affected by compulsory K-12 education and its institutionalization in the 1800s. And I believe that online education, so we're still just here, I believe that online education is going to be the next one. So after all those, though, where are we? We're at about 55% of the world's school kids get access to primary or secondary education. So, to primary education. So about 55% finish what the United States would call 6th grade. And about 22% finish high school. So as a species, the human race is still consigning about 80%, about 4/5 of our natural talent, to not finishing high school. So if you believe that talent is equally distributed around the world, natural talent, if you believe that the odds of someone inventing a cure for breast cancer or anything else are just as likely to occur from some girl in a Cambodian fishing village as from someone in New York City or São Paulo, then you must think that we're wasting about 4/5 of our geniuses, 4/5 of our Mozarts and Louis Pasteurs and Marie Curies, every generation. Of 1.25 billion school-aged kids in the world today, only about 250 million will finish high school. So in the entire history of the human race up until now, that was inevitable. That was just the way it was, and there was nothing we could do about it. Online education can suddenly change that. Because what online does is dramatically improve information quality of goods and services and dramatically lower cost of informational goods and services. By informational, I don't mean education as information. I mean that you can put some part of education over the internet. So I believe in 2 decades, we ought to be able to get online education to such a point that virtually everybody in the world who wants it can finish high school or even go to college. And that doesn't mean that there will be necessarily schools everywhere, but where nations can't afford to build schools or build enough schools, they can supplement with online education. So you can take the best teachers in the world or the best teachers in your country and you can give them to everybody in your country, everybody, almost for nothing. With live video, you can do that with what's called MOOCs, massively open online courses, or just with online courses, period. With archived video, you can do it like Khan Academy. Archived, that means pre-recorded video. Pre-recorded video is infinitely scalable. You can give that to everybody for free. Live video lessons, live video lectures is not infinitely scalable, but it's still very, very scalable. And you can also give them the best technologies. So this is the goal. You know, the developing world skipped landline telephony and went right to cell phone in some cases. So you had people in the desert on their mobile phone. And the reason that happened is because landline telephony is expensive. Well, education infrastructure is vastly more expensive than landline telephony infrastructure. So if you can supplement your infrastructure expenditure with very high quality online education, you can democratize education. You can get education to the other 80%. The level, the amount, and the quality of education that they want. So here's the kind of thing it could look like: live video lectures. And then here's what my company, Knewton, does. Now, I don't want to talk about my company too much, but I'd like to talk about what can be done with online education apart from just sending lectures. Because lectures is very, very important. Sending the teacher is extremely exciting. But there are other things that are exciting as well that can be done. And the other big thing that's exciting is personalization. So remember in the 1800s, that factory model that was so good because it reduced per capita costs per student to such a degree that we could give education to a much broader base. Well, the flip side of that is that it turned education into a depersonalized factory model. It's a big bureaucracy. And if you think about it, there's something kind of perverse about asking children to figure out how to cope in this extremely large Byzantine bureaucracy full of conflicting stakeholders and perverse incentives. And they've got to adapt to that system. And some of our talent, some of our natural talent can't adapt. The system does not work equally well for everybody. It can't. It's a fact of statistics. It cannot possibly work equally well for every student. Some are naturally a good fit, and some are naturally not a good fit. I was not a good fit. That's why I started Knewton. And what we can do now is we can grab your data. We can take the data that students produce passively without even realizing it, and we can use it to figure out the perfect strategy for each student each day, down to the atomic concept. We can do that. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, education produces more data than any other industry in the world today. Maybe biotech one day will produce as much. Maybe. It produces vast quantities of data. Now, the whole history of the world up until now, those data were lost. They were just floated away to the ether. And now they're suddenly capturable. If we can give students a device to work on, a tablet computer or a laptop or a mobile phone to do practice questions when they're on the bus, then we can capture those data that they're producing passively. So why does education produce so much data? If you all are familiar with the recommendation systems of, say, a Netflix or an Amazon or a Google, they are recommending big objects. They're recommending a web page, or they're recommending another movie or a product for you to buy. Those are big, chunky things. And the correlations between those things are extremely low, 10 or 20 or 30%. Okay, education is completely different. Education is full of minute things, sentences, atomic concepts, very, very small things. And the correlations between those things can be extremely high. So you can produce, not just directly, but indirectly, through inference, you can produce an extraordinary quantity of data per day. So these other big data platforms, Google, Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, Netflix and Amazon produce less than 1 data point per user per day, less than 1 actionable data point. And Google and Facebook produce in the tens of data per user per day. And Knewton today, for our most active users, produces 10 million. Knewton produces more data per user per day than any other company in the world produces about anybody about anything, and it's not even close. That's how much data education produces. If you capture those data, you can figure out everything about a student. You've got to set up this kind of a knowledge, like a taxonomy of all the concepts in the course. It's a little labor intensive. That's why we haven't expanded quite as fast as we wanted in some cases. We have done partnerships with very large publishers, people who have lots of students and lots of content, and it's easier for us right now to just plug into them. But over time, we'd like to release a retail version of this that any parent, any student anywhere in the world can use. We'd like to do that next year. But there's a content ingestion process to get all those data. But once you do it, and there's some, that's some of the underlying science, item response theory and psychometrics. Once you do it, you can produce data reports for teachers like this. I don't know how much of that you can read, but that is a teacher who, this is the first day of school. She's never met any of these students before. She gets concept-level proficiencies of every single student in that course. So she's never met any of them. It's a brand new semester. And to the percentile, we can tell her how good each of one of those students is at every concept that they've learned before they came to that class. And we can predict how they're going to be in that course. We can tell her, in week 3, this group of students you happen to have this year, they're going to struggle. There's no universe in which they are not going to struggle. It's not possible for them not to struggle in week 3. Why? Because week 3 introduces a bunch of concepts that build upon concepts that we know them to be weak at. So they're going to struggle in week 3. Or you might tell her things like, this group of students learns math best in the morning. They just happen to learn it best in the morning. They don't seem to learn it very well in the afternoon. We can tell you things like they learn science best with video clips instead of text, or in addition to text. And the ratio should be 78% text, 22% video. We can tell you how difficult the practice questions they get should be to encourage, to increase engagement and not to discourage them. We can tell you if they learn biology best in 22-minute bite sizes, because at the 24-minute mark, their click rate always begins to decline, and they start missing questions they normally get right. So pull it from them after 22 minutes and move them to something else. We can tell you, and tell the teachers, and tell the parents, to the percentile, exactly what each student knows on every concept, no matter how granular it is. And we can tell you exactly how they learn it best. So that's what you can do when you produce 10 million data points per student per day. So we're generating the exact perfect piece of content for you. We're taking the wisdom of the network. We're saying, so by the end of next year, we'll have about 10 million students who will have learned rules by the end of this year. We'll have had about 10 million students who will have learned rules of exponents and other basic algebra concepts through Knewton. And we can go find, for the next student, we can go query the entire database of all 10 million students who ever learned that concept with us, wherever they are, anywhere in the world. And we can say, who's just like this next student? Like, their learning styles are just the same. They learn in exactly the same way. So let's go take that group. Well, it's a fact of statistics that some top 1% of people who are just like you, through blind luck, some top 1% happen to learn it the best. Right? It's a fact of statistics that some bottom 5%, some bottom 10%, through bad luck did the wrong thing. They quit, they got discouraged. But it's also a fact that some top 1%, through pure luck, must have done the perfect thing. And those people are just like you. Great. Let's go find what they did. For every single concept you ever learned, let's give you one of the strategies that we know worked on people just like you. So we're taking the combined data power of a network of tens of millions of people, which we'll get to in a couple of years, tens of millions of people, and using it to help you learn every single concept you ever learned. And we can give that away to the developing world. Adaptive tutoring. This is a feature we launch next year. Adaptive learning, which I've been talking about so far, finds the perfect bit of content for you and gives it to you. Adaptive tutoring will find the perfect people for you to interact with. So you have a question. You just type your question into the system. The system text mines it, figures out what your question's about. Then it says, okay, who's just like this student? Whose learning styles are just the same as this student? Let's take that group. Let's find, of those, who are the top 5% in the world at all the concepts in that question? So they absolutely know the answer to that question. And let's find who learned it the easiest and retained it the longest and at the deepest level of proficiency. Those are the perfect people in the world to ask your question of, because they're just like you, so they can communicate the answer. We know that they learned it very well, so they maybe have some technique that they use that works for you. And we know that they're at the highest level in the world at all the concepts in that question. Let's go put your question in front of 10 of them in real time. 5 minutes later, you get 10 responses. Let's see if this pointer works. So this is one response. That graph there, which you can't read, is the concept mastery of this student, 97% on all the concepts in your question. That one below is the similarity to you. So we tell you exactly how good these tutors are, these other students. We tell you how strong they are at the concepts. We tell you how similar they are to you. And we give you 5 answers of theirs in real time, whatever we generate. So we just use the wisdom of crowds, but we harnessed it with Newton's atomic concept level AI to find the perfect 10 people in the world to put your question in front of. So we've seen some pretty extraordinary results. At Arizona State University, which has been using us the longest in the United States, we increased pass rates for first-year math from 66 to 78%. So they have something like 2,000 students drop out every year. And we increased their pass rate, and we lowered their student dropout rate to such a degree that they saved $13 million in the first year. We had similar results at Alabama, another big university. We had their pass rates had been in the 60s, and we improved them to 87% for first-year math. And we had similar results at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So we've started, to some degree, in the college market, but we're moving very quickly into K-12, and we're moving very quickly internationally. Those are our big goals for this year. So I'm going to leave you with this, which is basically, that is basically all the content of a course. Can we pause it and start over? Let me explain it first. Thanks. That is all the content in a course visualized on one slide. So the green buttons, those are basically each circle is a cluster of content. It's a whole bunch of concepts. So a big circle like this is a major area. This is statistics and probability, the green. The blue is ratios and properties. The orange is the number system. Right? So it's literally all the content of a semester's worth of math represented on one slide. And the little circles inside the big circles are smaller clusters of content within those big clusters. And the tiny little dots, if you can see them, are concepts or concept clusters. And you can't see the atomic concepts, but they're in there as well. It's just a way of visualizing all the content that is available to a group of students in a semester. That's all the content they could use for that course. Okay, and what you're going to see is these little things that look like fleas, those are individual students. This is real data. This is a real course. Okay, this is actual data from actual students in a real class. So it's 150 students. They're going to look like little fleas, and they're going to bounce all over the page. They're all going to do something completely different. They'll slow down. You'll see that they'll speed up. That's probably a midterm. Okay, and you'll see that some of them move very quickly. Some of them move so painfully slowly that you can just tell that that student is really struggling. And you'll see all this, and you'll see it goes over from September to December. It goes over time, and you can visualize the entire semester. It becomes organic. It becomes a living thing. Okay, please let's show it. Okay, so a lot of students are entering the course. Okay, they suddenly had a burst of activity. There was a midterm or something, and you'll see that when you break content down into its atomic constituents and then recombine it in an optimal format for each student each day, everybody's path is not only unique, it's not even close to anybody else's path. It looks nothing like anybody else's path. Look at this poor guy up here. He's in real trouble. That's the power of personalization. We can take this technology, we can make it low or no cost to the entire developing world, and that's part of the social mission of Newton. That's why I started the company. We're a for-profit, but we want to take these world-class technologies and make them available to the developing world at low or no cost. That's our social mission. Thanks very much.